Chapter 5, A Field Trip. Max Ernest had spent the entire bus ride to the Natural History Museum trying out mummy jokes for his graduation speech. The opportunity to make a speech was an honor bestowed on him as Bookworm of the Year, winner of the Book a Day reading challenge. Also, there was the fact that nobody else had volunteered. By the time they neared their destination, his friends were brainstorming ways to silence him. Maybe we'll find some loose mummy bandages so we can gag him with them, suggested Yoyogi, who, as usual, had an entire seat to himself and was comfortably reclining with his long legs up, showing off his neon orange sneakers. Cass, sitting with Max Ernest in the seat opposite Yoyogi, shook her head. Nah, he would just tell jokes with his hands. Don't forget he knows sign language. Max Ernest nodded cheerfully. How many mummies does it take to change a light bulb? He signed, mouthing the words. Okay, so we tie his wrists together, said Yoyogi, ignoring him. Forget it, said Cass. He'll just tap Morse code with his foot. Max Ernest started tapping the floor. None, they live in eternal darkness. Then we'll bury him in a sarcophagus, said Yoyogi persisted. Cass shook her head again. With our luck, any earthquake will push it to the surface and he'll jump out and tell some dumb jokes about zombies. Like this one? Asked Max Ernest, grinning. Do zombies eat hamburgers with their fingers? See what I mean? No, they eat their fingers separately. The plump boy who called himself Glob leaned over the seat in front of Max Ernest. Dude, zombies tell better jokes than you do. And I bet they give better graduation speeches too. Leave him alone, man, said the boy sitting next to Glob, his voice muffled by his dreadlocks that covered his face. This was Danielle, more popularly known as Danielle Not Danielle. Zombies are cool. They kick mummy butt. They're not mutually exclusive categories, you know, said Max Ernest. Zombies equal dead bodies that come back to life. Mummies equal dead bodies, ergo, mummies come back to life equals... Silence, please. It was Miss Johnson, standing up near the front of the bus. Our friends shrank in their seats, although they were no longer quite as scared of their principal as they once had been. She still had the power to suspend them or even prevent them from graduating middle school. And as much as they all feared graduating, there was one thing they all feared more, not graduating. Thank you, said Miss Johnson, holding on to her turquoise blue hat as the bus lurched to a stop in front of the old brick museum. Let's start practicing our museum voices now. Remember, a museum is not a zoo. It is a place of quiet contemplation and reflection. Unwrapped. Real mummies, dusty tombs, ancient curses, Walking Dead. From King Tut to Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff was an actor who became famous in the 1930s playing dead bodies that came back to life. If you are unfamiliar with his overture, I highly recommend the classic films Frankenstein and The Mummy. If you are unfamiliar with the word overture, this is a body of works of an artist, writer, or composer, living, dead, or otherwise. In The Mummy, Karloff plays Imhotep. The mummy, reawakened from the archaeological, accidentally reads an ancient Egyptian spell. By far Karloff's scariest role, however, as Santa Claus. He dressed as the red-suited housebreaker every Christmas and handed out presents to needy children, doubtlessly terrifying them half to death. Yet they are not just creatures of fantasy haunting us on late-night television or on the streets at Halloween. They are material specimens of lost worlds, real people of the past whose bodies have been preserved so that we may study them today. What were their lives like? How did they die? What secrets do they hold about their ancient hands? Join us in these voyagers from the past take us on a journey across time. Special thanks to the Egypt Supreme Council of Antiques Exposition, made possible by the generous grant from Solar Zero. Contrary to Miss Johnson's assertion, the museum was quite loud. The marble floor and vaulted ceilings magnified the kids' every footsteps, and a lot of other sounds besides. Most of the museum would be closed to the public for another 2 hours. The museum staff were using the time to repair exhibits and take inventory. It can be startling to hear soft-spoken curators shouting instructions or grave-faced museum guards joking with each other. But it certainly makes the museum livelier. If you've never visited a museum when it is closed, I recommend it. That's when museums really come to life. A special behind-the-scenes tour had been arranged by Danielle's father, Dr. Abel Nefrio, who happened to be the chief curator of the museum's exhibit. Dr. Nefrio, also known as Albert 3D, in reference to his 3 degrees, one archaeology, another anthropology, and one for Egyptology, greeted them next to the 8-foot-tall stone sarcophagus that stood just inside the entrance, dwarfing anyone who passed by. "Hi, everyone. Welcome to Chaos. We're just doing a little rearranging before the noon rush." The Nigerian-born professor had dreadlocks like his son's, but at the moment they were tied back under his old camouflage-patterned sun hat that looked as though he had been to the desert and back more than once. He wore a t-shirt that said, "Archaeology, dig it," and he ushered his guests into the exhibit as if they were entering an excavation of buried ruins. "Watch your backs," he warned. "The mummies most likely won't attack, but museum workers have been known to shoot prisoner poison darts." As if on cue, a student bumped into a ladder and a loose power cord fell down. Miss Johnson shrieked. Her students giggled. "So what is a mummy?" Albert 3D asked rhetorically, beckoning the last few stragglers inside. "Simple. A mummy is any dead body whose tissues have been preserved beyond the usual time. In this exhibit we have naturally occurring mummies as well as man-made ones. Mummies created in caves, in sand, in icebergs, and even in the case of bog mummies underwater. Bog mummies, if you're curious, and I can't imagine that you aren't, are usually found in the bogs of northern Europe. The peat in the bogs acts as a unique preservative and leaves the faces of the bog mummies quite uniquely lifelike. There are specimens from Peru, Chile, Greenland, Norway, and of course ancient Egypt. And then there are the animal mummies. First room of the exhibit was large and gray and a few doors and fewer windows. It looked not unlike a tomb, a strange futuristic tomb in which mummies were confined in protective glass cases. On the walls were big backlit photos of archaeological digs and ancient burial grounds that cast a ghostly, forbearant glow on the face of the students. The students fell silent as they got the first look at the mummies on display. While the bog mummies were hardly more sustainable than rags, others looked strong enough to stand. Some were wrapped in familiar linen bandages, others in sheets. Some were naked, others were wearing elaborate jewels and garments. Some had hair, some were bald. Some were sitting up, some were lying down. One was curled into a ball. Others were slumped over. A few students had to look away and take deep breaths. The mummies of unwrapped real mummies were altogether more real than they had imagined. Yoyoji shook his head. "Ridiculous, man." Max Ernst nodded uncertainly. Ridiculous was a word that Yuji had been using often lately. But as with many of the words he adopted, you didn't always know if it meant in a positive or negative sense, or in some other sense comprehensible only to those fluent in the language of cool. "I'll let you look around, and then we'll talk in a few minutes," said Albert 3D, "unless someone has a question right now." "I do," said Glaub. "Is it true people fart after they die? And if mummies fart, will it still stink 1,000 years later when the coffin is opened?" His classmates tittered. I doubt it," Albert 3D answered. Seriously, the smell would dissipate long before then. But you're right about the dead bodies. In Mayan mythology, the god of the underworld would call Sisson, meaning stinky one. While the rest of the class laughed, Cass slipped the ibis ring onto her finger. It was a bit foolish of her to wear the ring in public. she knew, but holding a little piece of ancient Egypt in her hand gave her a sense of confidence. Maybe seeing the ibis next to the other hieroglyphs in the exhibit would jog her memory today. She was determined to identify the remaining hieroglyphs of the secret. Her backpack, as usual, had everything she might need. Magnifying glass, check. Hidden camera, check. Molding wax for taking impressions, check. Brush for dusting specimens, check. Armed like an archaeologist in the field, Cass looked at every place she might conveniently find a hieroglyph. While the other students casually checked out the exhibits, she methodically studied photos of tomb paintings and copied spells from the Book of the Dead. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, also known as Papyrus of Anu, is the essential fertility guide that no self-respecting amateur Egyptian could do without. So, to quote no less than the authority than one Pseudonymous Bosch, see the Secret Series Book 1. It includes many important spells that instructions for success in the afterlife. Most useful introduction to ancient Egypt life above ground as well. She examined the decorations of the funeral mass and the carvings on stone sarcophagi. She inspected the tiny stiff figures who were supposed to serve Egyptian nobles in the afterlife, and the strange finger-shaped amulets meant to seal wounds and protect the dead. Yet, as far as she could tell, none of the hieroglyphs she saw resembled the hieroglyphs of the secret. Then again, perhaps the sketches in her notebook were incorrect. There was no way to know. Her confidence beginning to crumble, she stood holding her notebook open in her hands and staring at the bowl of natron and natural salt that is found in the desert lakes that is used by the Egyptians to dry out the bodies before they are mummified. Could you mummify a body using normal table salt? She wondered idly. Maybe she should try it on herself. If she didn't figure out the secret soon, she might as well be mummified. As she turned away, Max Ernst crept up behind her. He reached around and tapped her on her far shoulder. She spun around, snapping her notebook shut. What? Oh. She rolled her eyes when she saw Max Ernst standing there, grinning his little practical joke. That is so not funny. Did you see the ibis mummies? Huh? If you may be interested to learn that ibis mummies are quite common. In the necropolis and Soraka, the Egyptian famed cities of the dead, archaeologists discovered that mummies of 1.5 million ibises. It is believed that the ibises were raised on ranches specifically for the purpose of being mummified and offered to the gods. Upsetting, perhaps, but consider the fate of the chicken. Max Ernst eyed the notebook in her hand. Is that where you have your notes about it? Shh, whispered Cass sharply. If you're so worried about people knowing, are you sure you should be wearing that ring? Asked Max Ernst. Cass's ears flared red. Why don't you think of more jokes for your graduation speech or something? Max Ernst watched her in consternation as she moved on to another display. Have you ever wondered what a mummy's skin feels like? Touch here to find out. It was an interactive wall display containing swatches of leather, plastic, and other materials. She touched a few of the swatches and made a face. What's up with her? Asked Yoji. Max Ernst shrugged. You know Cass. Although Yoji was a fellow Trace member, it was Cass's business to tell him not about the latest development of her search for the secret. The truth be told, Max Ernst didn't want to talk much about it. He was beginning to wish she never found the papyrus in the first place. Yoji squinted. Is that a ring on her finger? I've never seen her wear a ring before. He looked at Oxdance and Max Ernst. You didn't give it to her, did you? What? No way. Why are you planning on asking her to marry you? Asked Max Ernst, recovering. Very funny. Yoji glanced at Cass. It was almost as if he didn't like the idea of somebody else giving her a ring.